The doctors told my family my twin brother would never wake up from his coma. They didn't know we had been speaking Morse code since we were 9. Our grandfather had been a Navy radio operator in Korea, and he taught us at his kitchen table over a stack of pancakes. By the end of that week, we were tapping messages under the dinner table when our mom told us to stop talking. At the end of that month, we were tapping through the wall between our bedrooms every single night after lights out. We had a whole language no one else in our family could read. Our mom was the one driving the night of the accident. The other car ran a red light and hit the passenger side at 50 miles per hour. Mom walked away with a fractured wrist and a seatbelt bruise across her chest. Chris took the full impact. He was in the ICU for 3 whole weeks and didn't wake up. The doctor said he might not ever wake up and that his body was just running on autopilot, but I didn't believe them. The first afternoon I sat by his bed, I pulled up a chair, took his hand, and tapped into his palm. "Are you there?" Nothing. I came back the next day and tapped again. Before I left, I always said the same thing out loud. "See you tomorrow, Chris." I said it every day for a week. A week in, his fingers twitched against mine and I almost fell out of my chair. I grabbed the nurse on duty. She barely looked up from her chart. "They are reflexes, honey. It doesn't mean anything." I bought a notebook the next day and started writing down every twitch, the time, how long, which finger, which hand. I filled 12 pages in the first month. 4 months in, my mom watched me scribbling at his bedside and said, "How long are you gonna keep doing this?" I said, "Until he taps back." She said, "He's not gonna tap back. You are talking to a corpse." I just kept writing. My dad lasted 2 more months before he pulled me into the hallway outside Chris's room. He said, "We need to talk about donating your brother's organs." I said, "His fingers move every time I hold his hand." "Dad, I do not care what the nurses say. You are not donating my brother's organs." A week later, they gave the green light anyways. They called the long-term care facility behind my back and scheduled a transfer date. They scheduled a meeting with a caseworker for the day before to sign the papers. My mom told me about it over dinner the way you tell someone the dishwasher is broken. I left my plate on the table and got an Uber to the hospital that night. I sat by Chris's bed for 2 hours. I tapped into his palm. I told him what they were planning, and if he could hear me, he had to give me something. Anything. A finger, a sound, a breath. I told him I knew everyone else had given up, and I told him I had not, but still nothing. I went home and couldn't sleep. I was back at the hospital 9 a.m. sharp. The caseworker meeting was in 6 hours, so I quickly pulled up the chair, took his hand and tapped "Are you there?" into his palm 1,000 times before. I tapped it one more time, and this time, something tapped back. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. SOS. I stopped breathing. I stared at his hand. My own fingers were shaking so hard I could barely tap the next message. "Chris, if that is you, squeeze once." He squeezed so hard my knuckles cracked. I sat there with my brother's hand in mine and I could feel his pulse jumping in his fingers. He was awake. He had been awake. He had heard everything they said about him. The corpse, the organs, the transfer, all of it. And the meeting to sign him over to die was in 5 hours. Chris was alive in there. He had been alive for months. And in 5 hours, my parents were going to walk into a room and sign papers to let him die. I didn't have time to panic. I didn't have time to cry. I needed a doctor in this room who wasn't already on my parents' side. Someone with the authority to actually look at Chris and pay attention. My parents thought I was home sleeping. They had no idea I was sitting 3 feet from the brother they'd already buried in their heads. The caseworker meeting was at 2 p.m. It was 9:15. I had less than 5 hours to prove what I already knew. I leaned in close to Chris and tapped into his palm, slow so he could read every letter. "I need you to do exactly what you just did when someone else is in the room. Can you do that?" I waited. My heart was so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then Chris squeezed my hand once. Firm, clear, yes. I reached over and hit the nurse call button on the side of the bed and held it down until the light outside the door started blinking. 3 minutes later, the door opened and my whole body went tight because it was the same nurse from months ago. The one who told me the twitches were just reflexes without even looking. She walked in with that same look on her face like I was wasting her time. I stood up. "Chris just communicated with me," I said. "He tapped SOS into my hand. I need you to watch him respond." She folded her arms across her clipboard. "Your parents already talked to us about this," she said. "You're having a hard time letting go, and we understand that, but these are involuntary muscle reflexes." That was her whole answer. She didn't even look at Chris's hand. She turned around and walked out. I stared at the empty doorway. The nurses had been hearing one story for months. The grieving parents trying to do right by their son. The brother who couldn't accept reality. Anything I reported about Chris moving got filed under denial before it left my mouth. I sat back down. If the nurses weren't going to help, I needed a doctor. Someone with authority who hadn't already heard my parents' version. I picked up the phone on the bedside table and called the front desk. I told the receptionist I was in my brother's room and I needed to speak with an attending physician as soon as possible. She typed something. "The attending physician assigned to that patient won't be in until noon."